What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be taking a look at two different tournament top fours. The first of which is from Community Gaming Latin America, and as a reminder, that is a closed deck list tournament, so players are allowed to change their decks in between rounds. But in fourth place, we are going to take a look at Ishan Jane's Hela list. And Hela has been a really popular deck recently. It was pretty good at the end of last season, and then at the start of a new season, Hela is always strong because you can use it to beat up on some bots. But Ishan was able to have pretty good success with it in this tournament, getting to a fourth place finish, and they told me they were really close to making the finals. They just did not draw Hela in the semifinals, unfortunately, which that is the luck of the draw sometimes. And now with Blink, Hela is able to get a lot more consistent. I was going to say a lot more lucky, but it's just not going to get unlucky as often because you've got Jubilee thinning the deck, and then you've got Blink to also look one card deeper into the deck. This is a fantastic Jubilee Blink deck because 2/3 of the deck are cards that cost 5 or more, which means your Jubilee is usually going to hit, and then you get to blink the Jubilee and again find something really big. So that's also why we see Corvus in this list for all of these huge cards. Odin and Leader is really fun, getting to see those two in combination, and Sandman is really good for a lot of the decks trying to dump a bunch of cards, and also Lady Deathstrike, pretty good against all those decks trying to dump a bunch of cards. Lady Deathstrike, before the nerf in the OTA at the end of last season, was one of the highest win rate cards in the game, and I imagine as a 5/6, Lady Deathstrike is still pretty good. It looks a little bit out of place. Normally we see Death in these Hela lists, but this one featuring Lady Deathstrike with pretty good work. Ishan said that that card worked out pretty well for them. In third place, we've got another Blink deck that I'm affectionately calling Blinks. That's because Kazuma told me this list comes from fellow content creator Binks, and it looks to be a really strong list that takes full advantage of Blink. We've got the Jubilee, which I already mentioned is pretty good, less good in this list in particular, but still quite strong, and then Leech being a recently buffed, really powerful Blink target, a 4-cost card that really doesn't have any power, but has a hugely powerful on reveal, can then easily get blinked out into one of these decks' really big threats. Claw, we are seeing a lot more of this week, basically a 5/12, so really strong, as well as potentially punishing like some of those Professor X decks that we were seeing run around as a way to add power to otherwise locked down locations. We also see Nocturne make an appearance here. I'm not totally sold on Nocturne just yet, but I do think that Red Guardian is good disruption, and White Widow is pretty good as just like a 2/6, which is all this deck is really hoping to use out of it. I will say Red Guardian and White Widow both are on reveal cards, so they are cool cards that you can blink out as well. It's a little bit tough to make them work on the curve potentially, but you could play like a turn 4 White Widow plus Jeff, or Jeff plus White Widow, play them in that order, so that way you blink the Widow, and then on turn 6 you're just hoping to play one of these two cards. These two, Dr. Doom and Red Hulk, I think kind of play interesting opposite ends of the coin in the same way that like Eliath and Dr. Doom used to, or what's another good example? Eliath and Blob used to, either covering all locations or just covering one location with a whole bunch of power. So I think that that makes a lot of sense to see these two paired up as the premier choices for Blink, just because they're like always going to be good. They're just solid stats is basically the way to put it. Then in second place, we've got Patriot, which has definitely seen a lot more play. And that is mostly coming off the back of the Ultron buff, but we also see Claw make its way into this list because the deck is already playing Onslaught, and now Claw has one of the better on-reveal abilities in the game. We're seeing that instead of Iron Man, which used to see some play in this list. I'm curious if we will start to see Claw alongside Mystique in the future, potentially as well, but this list decides to just cut those, but does play a lot of other different ongoing abilities, including Mobius, which is really great disruption here, and then takes advantage of the newly buffed Ultron. But this is a pretty sweet deck that, I mean, it does have some newer cards here with the Mockingbird, but is ultimately like a pretty classic list. The Mobius you don't really have to run. We're gonna look at another Patriot list later on in this video too that doesn't even include Mockingbird, so I think this could potentially be a really good new player-friendly deck, new or returning player-friendly, thanks to the new buffs to Ultron. And then in first place we have Loki. Maybe I should change the setup around here, just throw a giant Loki on the screen, but I do not have a deck list for this Loki player. I'm trying to get this video out as soon as possible, and this player has not gotten back to me. I actually asked them, what did you play in the tournament? And they responded Marvel Snap. Just a little bit of language barrier issue there, so they didn't exactly realize what I was asking. But I've been told that they probably played Loki, and that makes sense. Loki is a really powerful deck. They might not have played it the entire tournament, might not have played it in the finals even, but Ishan told me that they played up against Loki in the semifinals, so I'm assuming that this player at least played some Loki. We've seen a lot of Loki the past 3 or 4 weeks even. There's really been a strong uptick in Loki, so maybe people are sick of it. Maybe people don't want to see another Loki list, so I'm not gonna hunt it down. I will try to update the video description or Reddit post or something if I am able to get my hands on that Loki list, but if I'm not, check out some of my previous videos where I've covered these Loki lists performing well in the past. Moving on from you, Anarchy, we've got Sauron. No Shuri, this is just a Sauron list, which also uses Enchantress to clear out Red Skull and Ebony Maw, though Enchantress can't really clear out Ebony Maw. That's just going to be Sauron's job, and then also the Lizard. This deck is just hoping to put out a bunch of power and use Leech, which is really strong. Leech is not a symmetrical effect, but Shadow King is, and I think that's part of the draw here. Use Shadow King as a symmetrical effect, but it's not going to be able to harm the cards on your side of the board because you aren't pumping up anything. You're not playing Red Hulk, you're not playing Sage, that's the new release now, and just hoping to put a bunch of power on the board while just having like minimal amounts of disruption. And then other than that, I would say that this deck is relying pretty heavily or building into the Crossbones, which is a pretty powerful card now at a 410. I think that Crossbones is really good. You might know I was playing Crossbones before it was even a 410, and now that it's a 410, there is additional incentive to try to play into it with cards like Zero, Ebony Maw, Medusa, and Lizard to make sure you are winning some of those locations early. So a very fair deck, not trying to cheat on energy, so Mobius doesn't disrupt it. What this deck is really hoping to do is just dodge a lot of the common hate that's being seen right now elsewhere. Can still get hit by Cannonball. Nobody's really playing Shang-Chi right now since the nerf of Zabu. Shang-Chi's still pretty good though, still could probably do to see a little bit more play, but this deck right here, just trying to throw down a bunch of power. Moving on to our second Patriot list. Lily's like barely on the screen right now. Might cut that camera because she has wiggled her way onto out of frame right here. And apologies if I'm a little bit choppy. Not sure exactly why that's happening either. But here we have negative Toma's take on Patriot. Again, we see Ultron, we see Onslaught and Claw. This time we see Red Guardian added into the mix as a little bit of a disruptive element. And then we also see Brood and Squirrel Girl and Nico, which is cool, alongside some of these cheaper cards, but interestingly, no Mockingbird. I said this list wasn't going to include Mockingbird in it. I think that the popularity of this list is why we were able to see the previous deck do so well with Enchantress in it, and kind of building around a deck looking to take advantage of it, of wanting to play Enchantress actively. But this list actually beat that list in the third place finals. So do with that what you will. I think that this Patriot list is very strong now. I mean, Ultron just by itself, even without anything else going on, is a ton of power. It's basically like a better Doctor Doom if you don't have your other locations filled out. I mean, think about that. It's able to add 8 power to every location on an empty board. That's a much better Doctor Doom. So even some of these lists that we're still see playing Doctor Doom in the past, I think could potentially just like, they're gonna have to do something to Ultron if it's just a better Doctor Doom that turns off White Widows and then has additional synergies with things like Patriot and Blue Marvel. It could definitely be really, really scary. So Ultron is definitely something to look out for. I feel like the existence of Ultron means that Brood and Squirrel Girl are much less important and potentially not worth putting in the deck, but they're good like backup plans that still make it reasonable to play Dazzler. I'm not sure about them though. I don't think that these are super commonly played, but they were able to have pretty good results here for Negative Toma. In second place, we see a return of the king, Thanos. Thanos is potentially back. I'm not sure. Thanos still has a number of really strong cards that it can play. Psylocke got a little bit of a boost, and this list is running the Professor X plus Daredevil combo, but interestingly with no Cannonball. Instead pairing Professor X with Blue Marvel and Jeff with Valkyrie potentially able to spike one of the other 2 locations. I do like Professor X plus Blue Marvel in my Thanos list. I think that that's always a lot of fun. And the other thing is that Mockingbird still really, really strong in this deck. This list running Cosmo instead of running Leech, I might think that some lists are now more willing to run Leech instead of Cosmo, though maybe they felt Cosmo worked better on the curve or potentially on the final turns of the game after you've locked down a location with Professor X. Trying to snipe your opponent with Cosmo could potentially be more consistent than trying to Leech a Hela, because that can always be a little bit awkward if your opponent top decks it or just never had it to begin with. Cosmo is definitely a way to potentially gain you more cubes. This was an open deck list tournament. I do want to clarify that though, and pretty impressive for Thanos to be able to grab the number 2 spot after not being seen for a number of weeks. But even more impressive, you are not seeing things. This was the number 1 deck for the Community Gaming SEA tournament this week, and it features Domino, which is not a card that has been good in Marvel Snap for a long time, but there's potentially a few things going on here that are making Domino good. The first of which is probably that there was a content creator that put out this list that featured Domino and now everybody's trying it. Right, that's probably behind a lot of it. I'm not sure, let me know in the comments if you know who came up with this Domino idea, because I'm curious. But this is mostly a Blink deck that we have with both Jubilee, and Leech, and then also kind of Enchantress. If you are able to run out an early Enchantress, get the bulk out of its on reveal ability, and then blink it into a better card for the subsequent turns. Definitely interesting. Seeing Nocturne in the number 1 deck, that is definitely a surprise to me, but no bigger surprise here than Domino, which is also doing a little bit of work to make opposing Red Hulks smaller. And I think that that's probably a lot of the philosophy behind the Domino. We want to use our energy on turn 2 because that it basically makes Domino a 2/7 if your opponent's playing Red Hulk, because it puts 3 power down on the board and it acts to not activate your opponent's Red Hulk on that second turn of the game. So I think that's a lot of what's going on here. There were some tweets and some discussions from the devs of Marvel Snap right before Red Hulk released, teasing that they had some ways that they were planning on making Quicksilver and Domino a little bit more powerful without buffing them. And Red Hulk kind of was that. It never really caught on, despite Red Hulk being a really powerful and really represented threat across the top of the metagame. Nobody was really using Domino as a means to keep that at bay, but now we see Be Happy doing that and winning with it. So very, very cool to just see a card that has been in the game since the beta, been at the bottom of the tier lists. It was previously, if you looked at Untapped, it was on like the unrated, unranked F tier, bottom of the barrel, dog pile tier. Now Domino is at the bottom of D tier. So it's slowly climbing its way back up, but hey, to get a first place finish from what has otherwise been a pretty terrible card, I think is pretty cool. Again, we see Claw. I think Blink is just a really strong card in general, and then some hate here in the form of Killmonger, Mobius, and some kind of versatility in the form of Nocturne. Just being a 3/5 is going to make this card reasonably playable, and having niche applications or applications in a variety of different weird situations based off what comes up is always going to be fun. For today, that's going to be it. Subscribe for more Marvel Snap tournament updates and gameplay and other fun shenanigans like that. But for today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.